Hi, welcome to Safety with Zahid. In today's session, I want to discuss a topic that I see many people struggle with in workplaces, training sessions, and even during interviews. That topic is hazards versus risk. You would be surprised how many people use these two terms interchangeably, even though they mean completely different things. So today, let's understand the difference in a practical way, using practical workplace examples that all of us can relate to. Whenever I ask workers about hazards and risk, I often hear statements like, the forklift is a risk, or electricity is a risk. Technically, those answers are not correct. The forklift itself is actually a hazard. Electricity is a hazard. A chemical is a hazard. The risk is the potential harm that can result from those hazards. Once you understand the difference, risk assessment becomes much easier to understand. Let's start with a hazard. A hazard is anything that has potential to cause harm. The important words here are potential to cause harm. It doesn't mean an accident has already happened. It simply means that something exists that could cause injury, illness, damage, or loss if it is not properly controlled. That's why hazard identification is always the first step in safety management. Think about your workplace for a moment. Maybe you have forklifts moving around. Maybe you have cranes, they are lifting loads. Maybe there are chemicals, electrical panels, or rotating equipment. All of those are hazards because they have potential to cause harm under certain circumstances. The key point is that hazards exist whether an incident happened or not. Our job is to identify them before they become a problem. Now let's talk about risk. Risk is slightly different. Risk is the likelihood that a hazard will actually cause harm, combined with the severity of the consequences. In simple terms, we are asking two questions. How likely is it to happen? And if it happened, how serious will it be? The answer to those questions determine the level of risk. For example, if something has very low chances of occurring and the consequences are minor, the risk may be low. However, if the event is likely to occur and the consequences could be severe or even fatal, the risk becomes much higher. This is why organizations perform risk assessments before starting the work activities. They want to understand the level of risk and decide what controls are required. Let's use a forklift example because almost everyone can relate to it. The forklift itself is the hazard. Now, imagine a worker walking in the same area without proper pedestrian segregation. The possibility of that worker being struck by the forklift is the risk. So remember, forklift equals hazard. Being hit by the forklift equals risk. This simple example helps many people understand the difference immediately. Let's take another example involving electricity. Electricity is a hazard. The risk could be electric shock, burns, arc flash injuries, or even electrocution. The hazard remains the same. However, the level of the risk can change depending on the factors such as installation, equipment condition, and workers' competence. Now, let's consider chemicals. A chemical itself is a hazard. Depending on the type of chemical, the risk may include skin burns, eye injuries, respiratory problems, poisoning, or environmental damage. And that's why we review safety data sheets and implement control measures before handling the chemicals. Work and height provide another excellent example. The height is the hazard. The risk is falling and suffering an injury or fatality. Now, many workers mistakenly think the height itself is a risk. But remember, the hazard is the source of harm. The risk is the possibility of being harmed. So, why this is important to understand? Because effective safety management systems always start with the hazard identification. If we fail to identify hazards, we cannot properly assess risk. And if we cannot assess risk, we cannot implement the right controls. This is the foundation of every risk assessment process. Once hazards and risks are understood, the next step is controlling them. We do this through hierarchy of controls. When all possible, we eliminate hazards. If elimination is not possible, we look at substitutions, engineering controls, administrative controls, and finally, PPE. The goal is always to reduce risk to an acceptable level. Let me give you a very simple workplace example. Imagine there is oil spill on the floor. The slippery floor is the hazard. The possibility of someone slipping, falling, and getting injured is the risk. This simple example, but perfectly demonstrates the relationship between hazard and the risk. One of the biggest mistakes I see in workplaces is people focusing only on PPE. They wear all required PPE but fail to identify hazards around them. Safety is not only about wearing protective equipment. It starts with recognizing hazards and understanding the associated risks. Only then we can make the right decisions and work safely. Before we conclude, I want you to remember one simple rule. Hazard equals source of harm. Risk equals chance of harm. If you remember those two definitions, you will never confuse hazard and risk again. And it will make you understanding risk assessment much easier than you think. In conclusion, hazards and risk are closely related, but they are not the same. A hazard is something that has the potential to cause harm, while a risk is the likelihood and consequences of that harm occurring. The better we become at identifying hazard and controlling risk, the safer our workplace becomes. Thank you for watching Safety with Zahid. Stay safe, stay alert, and stay professional.